more time. So today we are starting on the topic Python, like as discussed earlier. So we are going to learn Python as a course on its own, since it is a preliminary or it's a requirement to the course we are studying. So I'm going to take your hands through every stage in Python in order to get you conversant with it. So just to get you going, today we are going to focus on Python introduction, what syntax are and what are comments and what are variables. Today we are going to start coding. So if you have not started your server yet, I think now is the best time for you to start your Jupyter Notebook server, and then just be ready whilst we get there. First question is, what is Python? So first of all, Python is an object oriented programming language that is an interactive one, of course, and at a high level programming language. Now, it is an interpreted language. That is an advantage of it that makes it faster. And another thing is that it is broadly used by programmers and data scientists. So if you learn Python, it is easier for you to do web programming, full stack programming, anything that has to do with web programming. You can easily do it as long as you know Python. Yes, there are other programming languages that are used for web programming, but of course, if you know Python, you can use what we call Django to be able to do web programming, and you can be able to do backend or API web services programming using Django REST framework. Now, going further, it has so many other uses that you can do with it. So one of these is, like I said earlier, you can create server-side web applications. You can do big data analysis and complex mathematics implementations. You can also develop database-driven applications. So there are so many things you can do all with Python. Good. Now, why are we using Python in this case or on this journey? You could have used R, or you could have used any other programming language that you can use with data science. But for the purpose of simplicity, we choose to use Python since it is one cross-platform language. And of course, other programming languages like R and all of that are all cross-platform. But this just a preference in the case to help us also if in the future and you want to maybe move into web, you finish doing your data analysis, building your data analysis solutions, and you want to expose them to the web or do write APIs that others can consume, maybe some powerful health solution, or that you want others to plug into it and then easily consume the service and then pay you, of course. Yes, you can easily do all of those things all with Python. That is why we are focusing using Python. So it has a vast range usage. And another thing is that it is simple to understand and use since it employs simple English in its syntax. So like I showed you earlier in the data type that I showed, like that I used to give you a glimpse of how Python behaves with those things. You realize that you just assign a value to it and it takes it from there. You can just write simple English, and you like the syntax are just simple English that you can easily understand. Good. And Python runs on an interpreter system, which makes execution to be done easy and faster. So as you are writing your code, interpretation is going on under the hood. That is one other advantage about Python. Now, there are several things that you can do with Python, such as variables. Now, primarily, variables helps you store data in memory. So, for instance, when you want to store the name of a product, you want to store the unit price of a product, you want to store the quantity of a product, all these things has to be stored in memory or has to be stored in your database as well. And you have to define the type of data to store in a database. So this can be a string data or a number data or a float data, or that can be either for quantity or amount or money kind of related data, and then either to store a true or false data, that is a Boolean data type. So in the aspect of health, you might want to store maybe somebody's name, the weight. Somebody's name might be a string, which is definitely the case, a string, and then maybe the weight can be a float. Since a weight is a decimal number, you can also store the maybe the heights and all of that in it, maybe the temperature, whatever you want to store about the person, maybe lab results, all those things. These are data that you need to store, and every specific data attribute has the type of data that it has to be stored in. In that case, it is easier to manipulate or work with. So that is what we call data types. So start the Jupyter notebook for now. Later, I will teach you Visual Studio Code 1.2 because primarily we'll be moving to this, but trust me, they are the same. Okay, so me, normally, I do create different folders for each topic. So for instance, Python, I've created a folder for Python. So you can, if you like, you can also create a folder for Python. But for now, just focus on creating the topic for today. So start the Jupyter notebook for now. You see a cell like my own. You click inside it and type print into brackets. Then you type something inside there. Let's say hello world. Press shift and enter. So just to walk you through quickly, if you want to add a new cell, you can just click on the plus sign at the top, plus code. So if you want to run all your cells, you just click on run all, and it will run all the cells for you. Then if you want to run individual cells, when you are in the cell, you just press shift enter and it will run it for you. I'll share this notebook with you after the class anyway. And I've added the comments, like the things that I explained earlier in the PowerPoint presentation. Going back to the whole thing, looking at the simplicity of Python, you realize that to print a simple message on your screen, all you need is the print keyword. Now let's go to what we call syntax. So we are going to the next topic for the day, that is syntax. So syntax is just simply the procedural step of writing a code, a step-by-step process adopted when writing a code. There are some rules that defines how a code should be written in R, Python, and C#, in C++. That procedural step or rule is what we call a syntax. And one of the rules that defines how code should be written in Python or a syntax is code indentation. Now, code indentation is a way of defining where your code should begin and where your code should end. Let's say, for instance, I want to print a message if a number is greater than 10 or greater than something. So let me say, if 10 is greater than 2, print a message and say, yeah, 10 is greater than 2. If you look at this carefully, you realize that after writing the if statement, one rule I must respect is to use the colon over here on the if statement. So I have to show that this is where the if statement ends. Then to now show that whatever code I need to run after the expression is true, I need to indent that code to become a part of the if statement. So if you look at it, I have to tap it. But when you are using Visual Studio Code, the moment you delimitate the code like this, you end the expression like this, and you press enter, it automatically does the indentation for you. Now let's try one more example. So let's say if 10 is less than 2, just write it. If 10 is less than 2, then colon. If 10 is less than 2, colon. Then you press enter. It should automatically tab for you or do the indentation for you. Then you just type over there, 10 is less than 2. That expression is false. Why? Because 10 is greater than 2, but you are checking whether 10 is less than 2. That is how come nothing got printed there. Now let's do something. Let's say we want to print another message, but that message is not going to be part of the if statement. What we do is we bring the indentation backwards. So we can say this message is not part of the if statement. So you can just print, and you can just put any message of your choice, but you bring the indentation backwards so that it can either be in line with the if statement. When you run the message, run the code, you will notice that the one that is not part of the if statement got printed. So just to test it and be sure about the indentation, you can just indent the one you have typed right now that it is not part of the if statement. You can just indent it one step so that it becomes a part of the if statement. You realize that when you indented it one step forward, it is no longer printing. So now you can bring the indentation backward so that it becomes outside the if statement again, so that you can just keep track of it. So let's try one more example, then we can move from this one. Let's say if 20 is greater than 2, okay, then we just say print 20 is greater than 2. Then we bring one more print statement that is outside the if statement. Then we say this message is outside. So let's check and see what will be the outcome. So you now realize that because both the first one was printed because the expression was true, that is 20 was greater than 2. So that was how come the other one the first one got printed. And the second one, because it is outside the if statement, the expression doesn't affect it. So whether or not the expression is true or false, it still will be printed regardless. Good. Now, the next rule to look at is comments. Comments are not executed, they are not run. And in Python, to start a comment, you need to add a hash sign. Anything that you start with a hash will be considered a comment and it will not be run. So let's just put an example to it. So just type this. So just type hash space. This is a comment. Now, there are different types of comments that I'll teach you later, but for now, I just want to remain at the basic level so that you can easily get it. Then we build on it. There's another comment that you call docstring, but that's too, I'll teach you when we get there. All right. So you can try as much examples you have. Now if I say I add, let's say, another set of comments, and I bring and I type, let's say, print, because I don't have a hash preceding it, only the print command that will be executed, the print statement that will be executed. So you realize that it has printed for me hello comments. Right, now we move on to the next thing called variables. So basically, variables helps you store data in memory. I want to store age. All I have to do is to say that age is 5, and then Python knows that this is an integer variable. If you assign 5 and later you go and assign maybe a different thing, let's say like age equals hello, you realize that you will get an error. Why? Because it is so agnostic that, but when you are trying to use the value, you realize that it will give you an error because age by default was to store integer and you are assigning to it a string. I getting it? So the moment I put it in quote, then it becomes a string and no more an integer. So let's try another data type too and see. Let's say name equals Lucky, and then let's print name. This by default will not be what? This is a string variable. So this will not become a string variable. So for instance, you notice that I have assigned string code Lucky to name, and this makes it by default a string variable. What you call it? Let's say is active. Is active. Let's say somebody's and I assign true to it. This automatically becomes a Boolean variable. So you notice that all of them, the variables, all the values are being used to determine the data type to apply when storing the data. Now, one last thing that I want to teach you before we end, second to last thing I want to teach you before we end for the day is variable names. You have learned how to declare variables. What is the rule governing how variables should be declared? How should you name them? So in naming variables, you have to ensure some rules must be observed. When naming your variables, try as much as possible to make them descriptive enough. So for instance, when I wanted to a variable called patient ID, I can say PID, but is that descriptive enough? So advisably, you should just say patient ID so that if anyone comes to pick up your project, the person can easily understand what you are trying to say. You don't use a minus sign in variable names. Number 2, you don't start with integers or numbers, but of course you can use different cases. So let's try some examples. So some of the things you shouldn't do, that is, for instance, so let's start with the things that you should do. So we said it should be explicit or it should be clear enough. So when declaring a variable name, you can say, for instance, a student name or student, let's say student name. That's why you can say, let's say Lucky. So a TYNCAD student name, let's say Zach. Let's say student ID. What is let's say so DS data science and machine learning 003. You are number 1. Sorry, cohort 3 1. Let's say this is an example of a student ID. So now I can still declare this same variable. I can still make it be like this: students and uppercase N name, then I say Zach, and I say student uppercase ID, and I say DSM 003. I getting it? So this is what we call camel casing. So this approach where you have a lower case starting and the rest are all capitalized is what we call camel casing. And the one that has underscore is what we call the snake casing. Very good. And the same thing, I could have declared it like this. Let's say student name, capital S, capital N, and I'll say Zach. Then student ID, I'll say DSM 003. This approach is what we call Pascal casing. So now what I want you to know is that because it is case sensitive, all of these are treated differently. So it depends on what you want. So maybe you want to adopt the Pascal casing in your project, or you want to adopt um the the camel casing, or you want to adopt the snake case. Any of them that you adopt, you still go by it. So I'll just print student name, just print student ID, then print student name. So all I'm doing right now, I'm just printing all the things that I have, all the variables that I've declared. So that is the whole thing. Now, just take note, Python is case sensitive. The moment you change a case, it's considered different variable. So these are the don'ts you should adhere to when declaring variable names. And these are the do's. These are the things that you can do. These are the approaches that you can use. And these are the things that you're not supposed to do. All right. Okay, thank you so much for your time.
If you have not subscribed yet, please do and click the notification button so that you will be the first to know when we release a new video. Visit academy.tincad.com and see you in the next video.